Bitcoin is only for people who believe in chain letters and COVID conspiracy theories. That's what Bitcoin and crypto professor Co-Pierre Georg says. And it's now completely escalating in a new article that he published here. He is warning heavily against Bitcoin, saying it's just speculation. He also warns of massive price manipulation. This is coming from someone who heads the Frankfurt School on blockchain here. Check this out. He has also done an Arte piece here together with Blockchain and Company, discussing Bitcoin. The whole discussion also went steeply. Now we see another article that is currently going viral and is leading to heated debates because some of the arguments presented here are really far-fetched. It is very, very questionable whether any professor here who has any title or anything like that would label themselves as an expert. And then they go all out against Bitcoin like this. On the other hand, they present themselves as independent professors. But if you look a little deeper, you can see that they are funded by Ripple. Ripple is a foundation that has consistently attacked Bitcoin throughout its history. He was also funded by other crypto projects. And then you see the massive fire against Bitcoin that we are looking at now. Because the arguments presented here are at best comedy arguments. These are not serious arguments. There are also critics who occasionally bring up some good points. But what Co-Pierre is pulling here is just very, very questionable. It says here at capital.de, interview with Co-Pierre Georg, blockchain professor. And then right at the top, the statement is already made that crypto is a highly manipulated market. And we'll get into why Bitcoin is a manipulated market later on. And you have to say, that's maybe the only statement you can somewhat agree with. Yeah, Bitcoin is definitely a manipulated market, but you can also look at it the other way, like Michael Saylor does. Bitcoin just has a very, very free market here. And when some whales decide at night to liquidate some long positions or something like that, I mean, they can do that. There's nothing wrong with it. Those are just the market mechanisms that some people interpret as manipulation. Sure, there are also exchanges or whatever that sometimes bet against their own customers or something like that. But that really has nothing to do directly with Bitcoin. It's more about the exchanges. And on the other hand, what is always missing in the discussion is that central banks or fiat money are never questioned. They're just taking shots at Bitcoin here. So I really wonder, hey, why is that? You could just do that here too. See it neutrally. You could also highlight the advantages here. Here, they don't even touch on the advantages. It's just a general attack on Bitcoin. Yeah, speculative conspiracy theorists. It's all just terrible. Everything's manipulated here. But before we dive further into the article, something else has come up, and it's from a podcast. It's an excerpt that actually happened before the Arte recording, but it's been brought back up now, and I found it again in my research. It really summarizes the criticism points very briefly, where you can also see the absurdity of it all. What kind of hubris is being argued here? Just dive right in here. Lightrider, who shared this whole thing, is already saying, my award for the worst Bitcoin criticism of the year goes to Professor Co-Pierre Georg, director of the Blockchain Center at the Frankfurt School of Finance and Management. And now just take it all in.
We touched on it briefly at the beginning. It's often criticized that Bitcoin has no intrinsic value. Unlike, for example, gold now with which you could actually buy something anywhere on the street, or even the dollar, which you can also use to pay. Sure, you can buy a few things here and there with Bitcoin.
Just a quick note before I continue, you can't buy something with gold everywhere on the street either. Buy something because you claimed that here. Well, that's not him yet, it's the podcast host. But for now, just keep listening.
That's right. Yeah, there are certain online shops that allow you to buy things with Bitcoin, but in reality, hardly anyone does that. It's purely a speculative asset, I have to say. What do you think the value lies in? Is it just faith? Is it just the narrative and the relatively strong lobby behind it? Or is there more to it?
I wish it were different. I wish I could say, the technology is so revolutionary and this is something we have never seen before. It will change how people handle money. I wish I could say that, but I haven't seen any signs of that so far. I haven't seen an app that suddenly allows me to do something that I couldn't basically do with a savings bank app. That just didn't exist yet. What remains is the narrative. And that's not a bad thing. That appeals to a certain segment of the population that also believes in chemtrails or about COVID conspiracy theories. Everywhere there are people. They're drawn in by this narrative. They also have a bit of money pumping it in there. And now they're trying to change the narrative by suddenly saying they're making it somehow acceptable. But that's not based on any fundamentals. It's built on new mental things, but it's just a narrative.
But the narrative is very strong, so I'm noticing it more and more in my surroundings. And these aren't necessarily people who believe in conspiracy theories, but those who are pretty sure that they've dealt with it.
Yeah, it is. This narrative is evolving. So historically speaking, it came more out of this very libertarian.
So you can't be a professor here at the Blockchain School of Finance here in Frankfurt, spending all day dealing with Bitcoin and blockchain and then coming to the conclusion that Bitcoin isn't revolutionary and that it's no better than some savings bank app. That just doesn't make any sense. That just doesn't work at all. So Bitcoin is an absolute money revolution here. So for the first time, we have limited money capped at 21 million. Decentralized money, that's something that hasn't existed before. I mean, a savings bank is all centralized. There's a central ledger. At any moment, they can turn off the money tap. You can be censored at any time and then just stand there and say, yeah, the savings bank app, I don't want to bash the savings bank either. Hate it or not, but Bitcoin definitely has advantages over the savings bank apps. That's a completely different dimension. We can't even compare it because Bitcoin is just so far superior. I mean, just think about that. You can do it yourselves. Manage your keys. You can be your own bank. With the savings bank, you're dependent on a third party. Like I said, no hate against the savings bank, but he just brought it up as an example. And I just don't get how someone can be so blind to this. So it almost has to be here. Or I'm not going to say that now. I'm not going to say it, because otherwise there'll be some beef later if I accuse anyone of anything. I'm just going to throw a question out to you all. Drop your question down in the comments. Drop me your answer. Do you think, and be really honest, do you think this is just stupidity, like that he just doesn't get it? Somehow, I don't know, there just aren't enough synapses connected in his head or something. He just doesn't get it. It just doesn't register with him. Or do you really think it's intentional negligence? That they're just framing it against Bitcoin because there might be some other narratives at play here? So feel free to drop your thoughts in the comments below on how you see it. I actually don't have a definitive answer. Maybe it's a mix of both, I don't know. For sure, the argumentation here is really, really strange. And all this stuff with the conspiracy theories. That's an ad hominem argument. Here, it's not about arguing on a factual level. They're just taking shots at the Bitcoin folks. Just because, yeah, they're all conspiracy theorists who believe in chemtrails. By the way, I just saw something earlier. That some law would be passed in the US by Donald Trump, banning chemtrails or something like that. I can't quite put it all together, but something like that. But that doesn't really matter. Even if there are no chemtrails or anything like that, it still has nothing to do with Bitcoin. So they're distracting from the main point here. Somehow they're downgrading Bitcoin and saying, these are all here, just conspiracy theorists who have no clue. And I'm the big professor here. I know exactly what's going on here. But now let's take a look at the article here. That also means right at the top. He doesn't think much of cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. On the contrary, he clearly warns private investors against getting involved. That makes me wonder if he might have the wrong job. I mean, yeah, you can definitely give some warnings, like about certain volatility. It is also important that you say that you are getting involved and so on. But warning people in general about crypto is exactly the opposite. We should really be debunking the normal Ponzi schemes that are out there right now, like the euro, the dollar, and stuff like that. And Bitcoin offers an alternative here. And if there's an alternative here, it means you really can't save in euros or dollars. If there's a savings method here, an alternative, then they also say, no, you can't do that. That's really bad. That means I see it as very, very dangerous. I see it completely differently. And people need to be educated much more about financial aspects. I remember Philip Sandner, who was the predecessor of Co-Pierre here. I was also on his podcast. He always said that it's really important for people to form their own opinions. That means he teaches here at the Blockchain School of Frankfurt. He teaches everything here, like different cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, altcoins, and so on. And people need to form their own opinions. And I remember back then, Philip Sandner was always criticized. And I also criticized him a bit for having such a strong focus on crypto and not enough on Bitcoin. But he was always so fair and let people decide for themselves. He said, hey, just take a look at it. I see it pretty neutrally. I'm just a neutral teacher here. Check it out. If you like it, then from me, buy it. If you think it's bad, then just don't do anything with it. But what's happening here isn't neutral reporting. It's actually framing that's putting Bitcoin in a negative light. And all of this has a bit of a bad taste to it. I really feel for the students at the Frankfurt School of Finance here. But unfortunately, that's just how it is. So, Philip Sandner really did a fantastic job here. There were even memes saying that Philip Sandner would be turning in his grave if he knew who his successor is now. It's really a shame how everything has drifted here. For those who might not know, Philip Sandner passed away at some point. I don't know, was it already a year ago or something? I really can't tell. Definitely a really cool guy. It's a shame that he's not around anymore. He also says here again, we've reached a level where we really need to warn small investors about the risks. Yeah, it just keeps repeating itself. So it's not just a one-time warning. There are multiple warnings being given here. Then, here this part is really cool. Here it was asked, you're a professor of blockchain technology, right? Are you not familiar with your own technology? And then he says, but blockchain is often equated with cryptocurrencies. It's not that simple. For me, crypto is a spin-off that serves purely speculative purposes. So he says here, blockchain is okay, but Bitcoin sucks. And that's always the question, is it really blockchain, the wonder tool? That was always the case. It was kind of like the 2017 or more like the 2018 time. Blockchain will solve everything, and so on. In the meantime, however, it has been realized that a blockchain makes almost no sense anywhere, except for Bitcoin. With Bitcoin, we have a use case where a blockchain actually makes sense. And what a lot of people want to do is put bananas on the blockchain, not realizing that it just doesn't work. Because what happens when the banana gets eaten later? What happens if I close the private key? Key to my banana gets lost or to the house that's on the blockchain. That means there are a ton of problems here. Here we have the Oracle problem that we can only ensure an interface between the physical and digital world with a third party. And if we put a third party behind or in front of the blockchain, why do we need a decentralized blockchain at all? Because if we have a decentralized blockchain and involve a third party again, then we end up with something else. Central banks. And then we haven't gained anything with the blockchain except maybe some cool password that lets us say, yeah, we're doing something cool with blockchain now. That's why I always say, folks, it's not blockchain that's the big deal, it's Bitcoin that's the big deal. Bitcoin is the first, and maybe even the only meaningful use case that currently exists for a blockchain. Maybe there are one or two other things like stablecoins or whatever, but it's definitely not the case that blockchain is the ultimate wonder tool. You have to be clear about that. Now we're talking about Bitcoin as a means of payment. He says, yeah, he worked here for many years at the Bundesbank. And this is where it goes down. Even the best blockchain is more expensive and slower, and more harmful to the environment than, for example, our Target 2 system. So I'm just going to throw this out there. The question is, how many wars are fiat currencies responsible for? How much inefficiency are fiat currencies responsible for? And then he writes about the Target 2 system, which is kind of a really good system, although the Target 2 system is also responsible for. That Germany is being massively pressured here. These are Target 2 pages open. You should really check out Hans-Werner Schinn. He explains it really well. How Germany is being massively ripped off by the two-day-olds, where enormous sums of money are being spent here, and I don't know if it's already in the trillions, I'm not sure, but definitely. That means enormous. Sums of money are being created here that Germany is entitled to and will probably never get back, because payments are simply written down like on a cardboard box, but are then never finally settled later. And Germany has a big claim, but they've never actually collected on it. And many also assume that Germany will never get that money back. And that's why many say that Germany is basically the cash cow of the euro system. And here, too, it's being massively disadvantaged. Of course, it can happen that other countries benefit from this story. But the Target 2 accounts are definitely a very, very critical issue. And then you always have the comparison that people say, okay, the euro or the euro system is so efficient. And yeah, it might work well for payments. And Bitcoin also has bugs. But you have to look at the bigger picture, especially when it comes to environmental damage. I would just go ahead and say that the last major wars wouldn't have escalated the way they did if we didn't have a fiat money system, but instead had hard currency like gold. Or, I don't know, Bitcoin for all I care. There are also other economists who say, hey, that's really bad about Bitcoin. Then we wouldn't be able to finance wars anymore if we had a Bitcoin world. That's another really cool point here. When I plug Bitcoin into a classic asset pricing model that shows me how much I should own of each asset class, it shows me a value of 0 for Bitcoin. So it's basically claimed here that, hey, you don't need to have Bitcoin in your portfolio at all. You should have 0 allocation. But that's not true. It's clear that the risk to reward ratio in your portfolio improves when you add small amounts of Bitcoin, like 1 to 5%. Sure, if you add too much, then the portfolio becomes more volatile. That means you won't have such a good Sharpe ratio. But the Sharpe ratio is scientifically validated. That it is improved by Bitcoin because it is an uncorrelated asset. If you add small allocations to it and then some blockchain professor says, hey, it makes no sense that you add Bitcoin to your portfolio and then cite science, but not here. The context understands that small allocations have been proven to improve the Sharpe ratio. And that's not just true for Bitcoin, it's the same for gold. If you take a classic 60 to 40 portfolio or something like that and add 1 to 5% Bitcoin or gold, then it is quite clear that the risk to reward ratio of the portfolio improves. And that's something that apparently still relatively few people understand. But even people who claim to rely on science don't seem to get it either. It was also interesting here where he writes, I would strongly warn against the US getting involved, as it could lead to a massive market intervention and possibly an even greater concentration of the market. So market intervention, that's not what this is. Market intervention is what central banks do. They manipulate interest rates, they start QE programs, they say, okay, we no longer have a D-mark, we now have a euro, or they simply say, as we have done so many times in the past, hey, we're just going to do a currency cut, we now have a new currency or something like that. These are market interventions, or that they set rent prices, like putting a cap on rents or something like that. But with Bitcoin, what's happening is that we have an open market, and anyone can buy Bitcoin. Bitcoin is for all. Bitcoin is there for states. Bitcoin is there for Trump. Bitcoin is there for Michael Saylor. Bitcoin is also there for the copier. Anyone can buy Bitcoin. It's open to everyone. And yes, there are certain concentrations at MicroStrategy at the USA, but that is simply any openness, due to the protocol. Anyone can get in, and if the retailers miss the boat, then the USA might be the first player to bet on Bitcoin. Or if, for all I care, Michael Saylor buys Bitcoin earlier. If he checks it earlier, then he'll simply have a certain premium here. But over time, everything will adjust again because sooner or later Michael Saylor will have to spend his Bitcoin. The crazy thing is, in the fiat money system, when things go south, we just whip up a bailout package. With Bitcoin, things are not that simple, and that is why Bitcoin is becoming increasingly better distributed over time, because it is simply not like the classic fiat system, where we also have concentrations where we can just redistribute from the people who are savings banks to the people who are involved in the money printing wave via the Cantillon effect. That kind of thing doesn't happen with Bitcoin, and that's why Bitcoin is definitely superior here. So I don't understand why it's all framed so negatively, and here all the benefits and opportunities are just being overlooked. In any case, let me know what you think in the comments below. Feel free to send me your memes. There were some really cool memes from the last discussion with the dealer here. I definitely find what's going on here very, very questionable. But hey guys, if you want to make a statement here, you can do it. Buy Bitcoin. You guys don't need to get all worked up. Just buy Bitcoin, hold it. It's always an opportunity. It's always a good buy signal when professors start bashing Bitcoin. Here, you can easily and securely buy Bitcoin at 21 Bitcoin. Here, with the code Bitcoin Hotel, you can still get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin. And if you're still looking for a Bitcoin hardware wallet, I recommend a Vault, one of the safest hardware wallets on the market. Here, you can protect yourself from hackers, theft, and more. You're really well set up with a Vault like that. I actually use them myself. Let me know what you think about it. See you later. Peace out.